Hello and welcome to our Sunday afternoon webinar. My name is Erica and I am with LDA of America, and I am happy to be here on a Sunday with you, and thank you for joining us. Just a few things, housekeeping things before we get started. Everyone is on mute for the main portion of the webinar, so the focus is on our speaker for the day. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. If you're connecting via the phone during the Q&A time only, please press *6 to unmute yourself, but ensure that you're not on speakerphone when you do this. We will have to remute you if you cause feedback when you unmute yourself. If you're connecting via the computer, please type your question in the Q&A or chat boxes. We'll be gathering those throughout the webinar for the Q&A session at the end, so they can be typed in at any time you have a question. I'm going to be working tech behind the scenes. If you're having any issues at all, my name is Erica Pardoon. Please use the chat to send me a direct message. Unfortunately, for those on the phone, we're unable to troubleshoot phone connections at this time. There will be a replay of this webinar sent to all registered attendees within 48 hours of the webinar, barring any unforeseen technical difficulties. Also, during this webinar, we're going to do something a little different. Our presenter is going to be using closed captioning to make the webinar a little more accessible for those for some of our attendees. So I'm going to, Dr. Collin Diedrich is our presenter today. He has a PhD in molecular virology and microbiology from the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine, a certificate in disability legal studies from the University of Pittsburgh School of Law, and he is a postdoctoral associate researching how HIV changes immunological responses to tuberculosis. Dr. Diedrich has multiple learning disabilities and personally understands how thinking differently can be a struggle and a gift. He is an advocate, author, and professional speaker for students who have learning disabilities. He advocates for the importance of finding your jetpacks. He's also the founder and president of LDA Pennsylvania, a 501c3 nonprofit that focuses on providing services and advocating for students that think differently. Dr. Diedrich believes everyone has a talent and everyone has a gift. He wants to help you find yours. Collin, take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Erica. All right, I'm going to turn on the subtitles. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining this webinar or this recording after the fact. So the title of my talk is My Learning Disabilities Made Me a Better Scientist. Let's help neurodiverse students excel. Before I give presentations, one of the things I like to do is just describe myself a little bit. And so, who am I and what do I do? Well, the first thing is that I'm a research scientist. I love the pursuit of knowledge, and I love being in a field where we ask a question that no one knows the answer to. We essentially, as scientists, basically want to understand the world around us. And I'm so fortunate to actually be a scientist. And my research focuses on HIV/TB co-infection immunology. Essentially, what I want to do is I want to understand why people that are infected with HIV are more susceptible to tuberculosis. And so in this pursuit, I received my PhD in 2012 from the University of Pittsburgh in molecular virology and microbiology. And I became a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. So I wanted to work with clinical samples and do clinical research. And so I was there for about 3 years trying to understand how HIV affects people that are also infected with tuberculosis. And after my research there for about 3 years, I moved back to Pittsburgh because I love Pittsburgh. And I essentially wanted to continue my work as a HIV/TB research immunologist. And so beyond my technical expertise as a scientist, one of the things that I also am is an advocate for people with disabilities and learning disabilities and ADHD more specifically. And so one of the things that I was able to do was get a certificate in disability legal studies from the School of Law at the University of Pittsburgh. And this helped show me how laws protect people with disabilities. And I am convinced that I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for some of those laws. And so in addition to all this like analytical way of thinking, one of the things that I also do is I'm an improviser. So I have this area of my life where I get to just be creative and fun and make things up on the spot. And it's really, really wonderful to do that. And so I also perform, I'm on a team that performs for kids at a local nonprofit comedy theater here in Pittsburgh, the Arcade Comedy Theater. And we perform twice a month. And so it's really wonderful to see the reactions to these kids of all of us being extra creative and fun. And it's a nice balance from all this like analytical part of my life. In addition to all of this, I'm the president and founder of the reestablished Learning Disabilities Association of Pennsylvania. And this has been a wonderful experience for me and incredibly stressful restarting this state affiliate. But I'll tell you about some of the stuff that we're doing at the end of this talk. But this is just like, that was just about me. But one of the things I like to do with my presentations is I like to ask people a rhetorical question. What is intelligence? And so if you start thinking about the people in your life that are the smartest people that you know, what are some of the things about them? So a lot of times we think intelligence generally also correlates to people that read a lot. So, oh, it's someone, you have a friend that reads all the time and you're like, wow, that person's really intelligent. Or people that just know things, you know, they're the people that are great at Trivial Pursuit. They don't have to Google everything like I do, or like check Wikipedia or all this just general knowledge. They just know all these things. Or a lot of times people equate intelligence to getting good grades. And so what happens when people don't get good grades? And so a lot of times when we're thinking about intelligence, we think about these very specific things. Oh, someone's great at Trivial Pursuit or Jeopardy. They know a lot of things. They get good grades. They may be really good at explaining certain things, or they think incredibly fast. And so these things all tell us, oh, someone's intelligent, or society a lot of times tells us that all of these things equate to intelligence. And so what happens when you can't do those things, or when you're not good at some of those things? And so we know, I'm sure a lot of us that are on in this talk, we know that 1 in 5 of us have a learning difference or an attention issue. So this is an incredibly prevalent issue. And if we look at prevalence in our proficiency in reading scores or comprehensive information, students and individuals that are diagnosed with specific learning disabilities retain and absorb less information than their peers. And so what does that mean when you grow up with lower reading scores, or when you're behind your peers in certain areas? And so it can have a huge effect on your life, and it had a huge effect on mine. And so I was diagnosed probably about 25 years ago for the first time with learning disabilities. And the last time when I got diagnosed, this was probably in my last year of high school, I was diagnosed with an unspecified learning disorder and an unspecified reading disorder. So you can think of it as dyslexia, and I've had issues with like written comprehension, and I read between a 6th and 9th grade level, and also my oral processing speed is at the bottom like 15th or 14th percentile. So what does this mean? Well, when I was growing up, I viewed words as words of prey. I thought of them as these scary things that I couldn't really comprehend. And so when I was sitting in class and our teachers would go down the line and have people read, have students read a paragraph, and then the next student reads another paragraph and another paragraph. So those were situations where I would get an incredible amount of anxiety, and especially because there's always that 1 or 2 students that want to read a little more, and I was always incredibly jealous of them, but they would screw up the balance of reading, and then the paragraph that I kept rereading so I didn't sound, or I felt like I wouldn't sound stupid, then I would have to go down and read the next paragraph. And so when you obsess over your fear of reading, then you're not paying attention to the words that are being said, and it makes learning really, really difficult. And so this is something that has been pretty prevalent in my life for decades. And in addition to that, I have a hard time learning new information. It's as if words enter my brain and there's a gradual decay of information. In addition to that, some words enter my brain and they get stuck. I see the words as they are, but I have a hard time decoding them. And so I feel like they just get stuck and I have a hard time articulating what they mean. And so just so we're all on the same page, I want to just explain to you how I process a sentence. And so I wrote out this sentence that says, "Today is a great day to run as a cake." And I like this sentence because it's a little silly. It doesn't really make that much sense out of context, but it actually has two complete ideas. Today is a great day to run and to run as a cake. And this may not make that much sense, but in the Pittsburgh Marathon a few years ago, I actually dressed up as a piece of cake because the marathon was also on the same day as my wife's birthday. And I ended up running this marathon wearing this wonderful costume. And I learned that, one, it's really hard to run a marathon if you're wearing a costume that catches the wind so much as like a sail. So that was hard. However, I also was able to like challenge myself, and it was actually a lot of fun that I was able to do this. And it was a fun way for me to say happy birthday to my wife. But if we get back to this sentence, how do I process the sentence? And again, I see the sentence as it is, but my biggest issue is in decoding. So what I'll end up doing is I will put in a randomly placed ellipsis where that sentence becomes, "Today is a great day to run as a cake." And that makes it very difficult for me to understand because I start separating the two concepts. And it's a little difficult and it takes me a little longer to actually understand what that sentence means. Another thing that I do is I'll put in inappropriate pauses and I'll say, "Today is a great day to run as a cake." And those fragmented sentences, when I'm trying to understand what those words are and what they mean when they're put together, becomes incredibly difficult. And so it makes it really hard to understand what the sentence actually means. Other times, I'll just remove individual words, and that sentence, when I'm decoding it in my brain, will become, "Is a great day to," as a cake, and I won't know that I'm talking about today, and I won't know that I'm talking about running as a cake. Sometimes I get rid of all the really small words and I just try to get the gist of the sentence, and I'll say, "Today, great run cake," in my head. And this is something that I do really frequently, and I have to guess what all the small words are, and I make a lot of mistakes. In addition to this, sometimes I'll become an editor and I'll say something like, "Today I'm going running with cake." And so my brain's processing this. It sees all the words, but it's basically guessing what this sentence means. And I end up making mistakes. In addition to this, sometimes I'll smush the words together, and this sentence in my head will become, "Today is a great day to run as a cake." And that doesn't make much sense because in my head, I'm thinking, what is a "today is a great" and what is an "as a cake"? These aren't words I know. And so I have a hard time understanding what this means because I'm trying to figure out what these words are that I've never seen before because I'm creating them myself in my head. But the thing that happens the most often to me and to students that I've talked to and adults that I've talked to that also have reading disorders is you just simply forget it. You forget what the beginning of sentences are and you only remember the last few words, or the reverse where you remember the first word or two and you forget the second half of it. And this happens because reading is not natural to me. The English language is not, to me, is not logical, and it just doesn't make much sense. So when I'm reading a letter, we know that letters, they make specific sounds. And then when two letters are together, their sounds can be completely different. And so I'm trying to figure out what the phonetics are in the individual word that I'm reading. And I'm struggling and putting a lot of mental energy of being able to say the word in my head, because I say every word in my head when I'm reading. And then you have to think about it as you're not just reading that one word, you're reading multiple words in a sentence, and you're reading multiple sentences in a paragraph. You're reading multiple paragraphs on a page, multiple pages in a chapter, multiple chapters in a book. And so this forget it becomes a huge problem, because I'm expending so much energy reading all of these words that I actually end up forgetting what this entire book is about, even though I've spent hours reading it. And so this is just some of the negatives that actually happen. And I like to articulate also that it's not just reading books like that look like they're redacted with like a CIA highlighter, like it's a top secret document. But I also have issues with simple words when they're just by themselves. And I think a lot of that has to do with just being exhausted, mentally exhausted, because I have to read so much during work. And so I have issues also reading street signs, where it just takes me longer to just know when I need to turn. And I have issues reading on menus as well. And so now I've gotten to the point where I'll just point to something and I'll say, how do you pronounce this? But it also can be embarrassing too. And so there are all of these issues, like my learning disabilities and issues don't just end in the classroom. They also extend to my everyday life. And so when you grow up thinking like this, what does this do? How does this make you feel? And so, well, you hear things like, oh, well, you're stupid. And I'll say, well, no, I'm not stupid. I have learning disabilities. And they'll say, well, LDs aren't real. And I'll say, wait a minute. They are real. It was diagnosed, and first diagnosed me, seemed like he was smart and he did this. And so I just need to work real hard. They'll say, no, you're lazy. That's why you got this diagnosis. And in my head, what I would tell these students or these friends or peers of mine, I would say, no, I'm not lazy. How could I be lazy? I'm spending 2 or 3 times as long working on this homework assignment than you are. And I may not get as good of a grade as you, or I might get as good of a grade, but I'm working 2 or 3 times as long. How could I be lazy? I feel like I'm working really, really hard. And then I've heard in my life, which is unfortunate, that people will say, well, it's survival of the fittest. If you can't handle it, then that's on you. And at first, you say, like, what a horrible thing to say to a young student or a young adult. But also, like, to put my scientist hat on, people misrepresent Darwin's theory, and also survival of the fittest isn't technically accurate. And so now I feel smart enough, or now I feel that I have the credentials to correct people that say that, but it can be incredibly difficult when you hear things like that. And then when you're growing up and you do get the accommodations, you get the diagnosis, and you get that extra time or the reduced distraction environment, then other students would say, well, why do you get that extra time? I want that extra time. I would get a good grade if I had time and a half. And I would say, no, I need this because I read at a much lower level, and I just needed it to, like, represent what I know. And they say, well, are you slow? Or they'll call you the R word. And I'll say, well, no, I have learning disabilities, and I try not to, and I feel really bad when people were mean. And that can be really hard, because then you start saying, or you start thinking, well, you don't belong here. And that's what people start saying. Well, it's like, okay, well, this is high school or this is college. Do you belong here? And so when you hear all those things, and we have so many students that hear this every day or weekly or monthly, then it turns into, I'm stupid, or you're lazy turns into I'm lazy, or are you making this? You're making this up turns into I'm making this up. And you start questioning yourself. And that can be really, really hard to deal with when you're a student and even when you're a young adult or an adult. And so essentially what happens is when we are on our path to find success, when we have these learning disabilities, what does this mean? Well, one of the things is that we all need to define success however whatever is right for us. For me, I wanted to become a scientist and I wanted to make a difference in that. But to you, you may want to be really good at sports or be an artist or get good grades on in classes or read books. But what happens is we have this barrier, this extra barrier that's really difficult for us to overcome. And that barrier is just thinking a little differently. And so how do we overcome this when we feel like success is impossible? Well, one of the things that we can do is we can find our jetpacks. And the way that I find define jetpacks is a person or someone that can help you overcome these walls. And I feel like jetpacks are probably the best way anyone can overcome or like climb over a wall. And so I view jetpacks as people and techniques that help you overcome the barriers in your life, because no one is finding success without help. And all of us in the LD community need to find that help or need to be those jetpacks to other students. And so the wonderful thing about these jetpacks and learning these techniques and finding all these people that were helpful is that they also helped me become a better scientist. And so there are a few things that I think are really important with becoming or with being a jetpack. One of the things is that jetpacks need to teach students how to self-advocate for themselves. So jetpacks provide help to students or to their kids or to their friends on like how to overcome certain things. But what's critical is that we need to learn or we need to teach other students how to self-advocate for themselves so they can actually develop some of these new skills. And so I'm going to talk about how my jetpacks have helped me overcome a lot in my life when I was really struggling. And so one of the wonderful things about learning all these techniques and dealing and having all these jetpacks and people in my life is that the skills that I learned growing up are the same skills that I use today. And so these skills are just so important in finding success. And so how did this happen? Well, my first advocates were my parents, and what they essentially did was they identified that I had an issue with reading and learning, and they talked to some of the teachers and counselors in my elementary school, and they decided after some reluctance to actually get me tested for learning disabilities. And they initially were nervous about this, because of the stigmas associated with people that have are diagnosed with LDs. And so it's because those stigmas are so strong and can be so negative. I'm extra thankful that my parents actually said, you know what, Collin needs help. And so we're going to try to get him all the help that he needs. And I was incredibly fortunate because I was diagnosed for the first time in 4th grade. And when I was diagnosed I started to get the help that I actually needed. And in addition to that, I even attended all of my IEP meetings, and I didn't quite understand what was going on, but I knew that I had a lot of adults that were in a room trying to make education and learning in school easier for me. And they were helping me learn, even if I didn't know all the details that were happening. And in addition to this, my mom actually sat in on classes at the end of each year, and she basically helped pick the teachers that I would have for the subsequent years, because I was a really wild and obnoxious student a lot of the time. I wanted to do a lot of stuff for attention, and I was super, super wild, and I needed pretty strict teachers to actually help keep me in line. And so because I had parents that were always there for me and helped me, and because I had a school that was there for me, that allowed me to actually get receive these accommodations, I was actually able to do well in school, and that was wonderful. And this was also in this was in a public school in St. Louis, Missouri, and that was wonderful. And in addition to this, I had a special education tutor, and I saw this tutor from 3rd grade to 12th grade, and she was awesome. And her name's Kathy. And what Kathy taught me was she taught me that, one, it was okay that I thought differently. Two, she taught me how to process information in a way that was appropriate for me and effective. And essentially what she did was she taught me the skills that I continue to use today. And so I'm incredibly thankful for the highlighting skills and the web outlines that I learned and the organizing of information. And all of that was first planted in me in 4th grade. And so that is something that I feel like is incredible. And I was so fortunate for that. And so in addition to all of this, and I started to learn early on that I wasn't balanced as much as my friends were and the other students in class. I was the one that was always studying, or I would go home even in elementary or middle school and I would study for hours and hours. And at one point, my mom talked to one of my teachers because she was worried about me, about how much I was studying. And the teacher actually took a survey of how long everyone was studying, and I was studying more than anyone else in the class. And so this was something that I just had to learn, that you want to know what, there's I call it an LD balance, that I just have to study longer or spend more time on things to process the same amount of information. And this balance is also something that is really important as being a scientist, because when you're a scientist, you are spending hours and hours in lab, and you don't have the same balance as a lot of people that you know, and you're spending extra hours, working so many hours a week, or spending 10 or 15 hours in the lab focusing on these specific experiments. And this is something that I actually learned early on, and so I'm incredibly thankful for that. And so my parents were my first advocates. And essentially what they did is they showed me that that I have a disability and that it's okay. And I started to become relatively comfortable with it as much as I could. And I learned that I had jetpacks around. I learned that there were people around me that wanted to help me. I also learned that help wasn't easy, that you had to fight for it. And so when you ask for help and someone says no, then you need to find someone else to get help, or you need to figure out a different way for that other person to provide that help. And this is something that I had to learn really early on. And I think attending all those IEP meetings was critical for that. In addition to this, I also started to self-advocate. And by self-advocating, it was really small at first, where my teachers in elementary school and middle school, I remember them coming up to me and saying, "Hey, Collin, so what do you need for this test?" And they knew that I needed extended time and that I was going to take it in a reduced distraction environment. But essentially, they were asking me, and they basically forced me to say what I needed. And I don't know if they were intentionally doing this, but essentially they were showing me what self-advocacy is on a small scale. And so I feel like I learned to self-advocate very early on. And that's, I'm thankful to my parents and to my family and to my early teachers that actually helped me out with this. In addition to this, my mom actually found Bradley University for me, and where I ended up going to college. And she found it because she knew that they have a good disability resource center. And that's why I chose to go to Bradley. And Bradley also had a nice physical therapy program. And at the time, I wanted to be a physical therapist. So I was like, okay, I'll go there. They have a good disability program. That's fine. I'll just do it. But when I got to college, I started to notice how imbalanced I was. And I was incredibly imbalanced. I studied almost all of my free time. I also ran cross country in college. So I basically would wake up, study, and I would go eat, study, go to class, study, go to practice, study, and then study and go to bed. And, but I knew I had to study because everything took me longer, and I basically obsessed over it. A part of the reason that I did this was the fear of looking stupid or feeling stupid, which is unfortunate, and it's unfortunate when fear is a driver of what you do. But it was something that I actually learned early on, is that my imbalance when I was in elementary school, middle school, and high school helped push me in college, that it was okay that I was studying so frequently. And the way I studied was pretty intense, where I essentially would read all the chapters before, all the reading before each of the classes. I would highlight those notes. I would take those notes and type them up. Then I would go to class with a digital recorder. I would record the lesson. I had the printout during the lecture, and on the right side of the PowerPoints, I would write all my notes during class, but I would annotate the time of that the professor was talking about each individual slide. And then after class, I would go to the library and study and listen to those lectures and write down on the left-hand side all of the detailed notes that took about 2 or 2.5 times as long as the class. Um, and that helped me process that information. In addition to those notes, I would highlight those notes, and then I printed those notes out, and I would highlight those printouts, and then I would make flashcards, and I would study those flashcards from those notes, and then I would make these real large one sheets with all the information on it, where I would write incredibly small, and but fit all the information that I needed to know on the test on a single sheet of paper. And that was just the best way that I learned how to study. And this also came from my tutor, my special education tutor, Kathy, where I knew I always had to review information. And this also helped me when I'm reading scientific articles today. I do the same exact thing. I also had to learn early on in college that I had to be goal-oriented. Being goal-oriented meant that I wrote down my academic goals, my research goals. And in addition to that, because I would get such hardcore tunnel vision, I started to learn that then I would start to neglect my family and friends. And I had to put in my goal sheet that, okay, I want to call my family, this many times a month. I need to go out, a few times a month with my friends. And that actually helped me keep me balanced. So writing down your goals is incredibly important. And this also helps you out when you're a scientist, because your experiments take so long and they're really difficult, and you need to know why you're doing it. And that's something that's incredibly important. In addition to these goals, when I was a sophomore and joined my first research lab, I wrote down, I want to be an HIV researcher in sub-Saharan Africa, because I wanted to understand how a pathogen affects a country or a region that that is that's highly prevalent and with high incidence rates. And so I was really fortunate that 10 years after that, I was actually able to go to South Africa and become an HIV TB researcher. And so in addition, college really helped me learn how to self-advocate. And for those of you that are going to college or that are at college, one of the things that I found incredibly important was talking to my professors. And the only reason I talked to my professors about my learning disability is because when I first met with the disability resource officer and I explained to her about my disabilities and I gave her all the documentation, she said, you know what, you can get all the accommodations. She wrote out a bunch of letters for me, and she said, okay, now you can just give these to each of your professors. And I said, wait a minute, you should give it to them. Isn't that your job? And I learned early on that isn't that your job is a horrible thing to say to anyone. But I also learned, she said yes. And so I was obviously really upset. I was an 18-year-old, and I left her office and stormed to my dorm room. And I was like, I can't believe she's not sending this over. That's ridiculous. But then I ended up going to my first biology class, and I left all those letters in on my bed. And this biology class was the first class I ever took. And I didn't want to talk to the professors, but this Professor Johnson, that was giving us this lecture, he essentially said, at the end of his syllabus on the first day, he said, if anyone's registered at the Disability Resource Office, come talk to me. And that was basically just something, I felt like he was directly talking to me. And so that made me comfortable to approach him. And I nervously approached him and said, I got accommodations. And I was talking like this. I was really nervous and lowering my voice and head. And I told him what I needed. And he said, okay, just, do you have the paper? And I didn't have the paper because I left it in my room because I was embarrassed. But I ran back to my dorm room and got the sheet, the official accommodation sheet, and I gave it to him. But his approach, saying that it was okay, was something that was really, really helpful to me. And that was something that was really, really wonderful. So I had to learn how to self-advocate, and that translated that every other class that I went and asked for accommodations for became easier. It turned in from me asking, is it okay if I get an accommodation, to thank you, professor, my senior year, for giving me these accommodations. And I feel like that's something that really helped me. And that also taught me in science, you have to advocate for yourself. You have to ask different scientists that have different expertise for help in your studies. You have to ask techs or graduate students or postdocs or research scientists for help on doing certain experiments and stuff. And all this self-advocacy, this training that I had early on really helped me do that. In addition to this, the thing that I learned the most is that knowledge was precious. I spent so much time trying to learn new things that I never take knowledge for granted. And so that's something that I'll always take with me, that knowledge is something that is really precious and something that's wonderful that we all should learn. And this showed me that being a scientist not only allows me to learn what we know, but ask new questions and try to add more knowledge to the world. And this is something that I think that my learning disabilities and the way that I think actually really helps me out. And so I started to feel pretty good about my LDs in college, and outwardly I was kind of open about my learning disabilities. I would tell people, and I would say, hey, I got a good grade on a test, even though I read poorly, and I would like joke about it as like a self-defense mechanism. But inwardly, I was dealing with imposter syndrome. And I started to believe that I didn't belong here, or I didn't belong in college. And that was something that was really, really difficult for me. And so like outwardly, I'd say, hey, I'm totally okay. But inwardly, I'd say, you know what? I did well on this test, but they're going to find out I'm stupid on the next test. And that's really, really difficult. And so I started to retreat when I started grad school. I went from being open about my learning disabilities to being closed off again. And I didn't want to tell anyone in my grad school that I had learning disabilities. And that was really, really difficult. And so I actually, grad school is a situation where I basically had to like reinvent how I thought about my learning disabilities. And I only told, I only disclosed that I had learning disabilities after a conversation with a boss of a lab that I really, really liked. And our conversation went so well that I told her, you know what, I have learning disabilities. I got an accommodation, and I got accommodations in college. Can I get them here? And she said, oh, absolutely. That's not a big deal. And so it's just how important those simple conversations are so important to our success. And so one of the main lessons that I learned in grad school and beyond is becoming comfortable with failure. And so I failed so many times in my life, and it can be really, really difficult. I applied to 8 different grad schools as a college student, and I ended up getting rejected from 7 of them. I ended up people would tell me, why did you choose to go to the University of Pittsburgh? And I'd make up something like, oh, well, they have a great HIV program. This is what I want to do. And I would, say all this stuff. But the truth was, they were the only school that wanted me. And my second year of grad school, in my program, you take something called a comprehensive exam. And that comprehensive exam is really difficult. You essentially write a thesis of what your research is going to be for the next 4 years. And then you basically say all the experiments you're going to do and how you'll interpret results. And so I ended up doing this, and what was really difficult for me was I got a lot of help. I asked for help from great grad students and postdocs that were in my lab, and I ended up passing the written portion of that. And then after you pass a written portion, you have basically three bosses of labs that we call PIs, they're primary investigators. They basically quiz you on what you wrote. And so essentially I went to an oral defense and I ended up failing it. And this was a really hard time in my life because I was answering questions poorly. I didn't know I didn't know what to focus on. I was worried about uh, dead air, like not saying something or taking too long to think about things. And I failed it, and I deserved to fail it. And this was something that was really, really hard. And if you fail that test 2 times, then you get kicked out of school. And so after I failed that, I thought that I was like, okay, well, I might actually get kicked out of school. And I was in a really depressed state for about a month. And towards the end of that first month, my parents actually came and visited me in Pittsburgh. And it was really, really great that they came. And we were actually at the mall, I think at like Anthropology or something, some fancy store. And with my like sister and brother-in-law and my parents. And I ended up like starting to get choked up. And I went to the cafeteria and I started to cry on like a bench or something. And one of the things that I'll never forget is that my dad came out to me and he said, I know, what you're dealing with is really, really hard. And I was like, Dad, like I could get kicked out of school. And he said, you want to know what? You're right, you could, but I don't think you will. And he said, you've picked yourself up so many other times when things have been really hard for you. So I know you'll be able to do this again. And what he essentially did was he acknowledged that it was really hard for me. He acknowledged that there is a possibility that I could fail, but he said, I know that you have overcome other things, and I think you'll overcome this. And that was the seed that I needed to be planted in my head to say, you want to know what? I think I can. Because he acknowledged the pain that I was feeling, but also said, I know that you could actually overcome this. And so this is something that really helped me because I've dealt with so many failures in my life. And then sometimes you just need a loved one to say, you know what? I think you can do this. And here's why. And this is also something that's incredibly important as a scientist, because science is based on failure, and all of our experiments fail until they don't. And so whenever you see a paper that's published, there are thousands of hours that go into that paper, and the majority of it are scientists trying to figure out how to get an experiment to work. So my learning disabilities helped me deal with failure. And so as a scientist, I'm more comfortable with saying, okay, that experiment didn't work. What can I do in the future? Or how can I fix it? But once you start feeling that success and feeling better, sometimes that imposter syndrome comes back and you start questioning yourself. And that's when you have to start leaning on your jetpacks, the people in your life. And as a grad student, I was really fortunate that my parents and family and friends were really supportive. But I also had a wonderful girlfriend at the time, and became my fiance, and now we're married, who is my number one advocate now, and the person that helps me out the most. And so I have all of these jetpacks around me. And when I'm trying to overcome a lot of these stressful things in my life, sometimes I look in the mirror and I see these jetpacks, but I would get mad at them, or I'd say, well, you said I would do this and I didn't do it. You like lash out at the people that are supporting you the most. And so whenever I see a jetpack as an anvil or something that isn't helpful, and I know these people, all these loved ones and my family are so supportive, I have to basically shatter that mirror and say, you want to know what? No, they are here for me. And this is the reason I'm actually able to be successful. I also learned that there's no perfect glove. And I use glove as a metaphor for techniques. That when I first started talking to my PI in the lab, the boss of my lab, and I was explaining to her my data, she was incredibly patient with me, and she allowed me to outline all my notes for our weekly meetings and all that. And that was really wonderful. So when I graduated, when I got my PhD in 2012 and I moved to Cape Town, I was going to use those exact same techniques that I used when I was talking to my boss. And essentially what I learned was those techniques weren't as good with this new boss. It was like I had a baseball glove, and when I was in my first boss, it was like we were playing catch. But then when I went to this new when I went to this new school and I had this new boss, it was as if I was trying to climb a mountain with a baseball glove. And that became incredibly difficult for me. So I had to modify my techniques on how to talk to different PIs and different people in labs to actually be able to explain myself and actually work with them. And so that's something that I think is really important, not only for people with learning disabilities, because you have to learn how to talk to different professors and different teachers about the accommodations and the things you need. And you also need to talk to your friends about it if you're open to that, and talk to other people, but you don't talk to everyone the same way. And so I had to learn that, and I learned that pretty late in life, actually. And so in addition to that, as a scientist, because with my learning disabilities, I learned how to talk to so many different people and different with different situations. I also had to learn as a scientist to talk to experts in the field of TB immunology or HIV immunology, and also my like young nieces or nephew, just about, hey, I'm a scientist, what does this mean? And so then you basically have to change the way you talk to different people about what you do when you're a scientist, so everyone can gain that knowledge that I think is so precious. And I think my learning disabilities and how I had to approach them allowed me to learn how to do that. And so with all of this together, I feel like a successful scientist because of my learning disabilities. And I'm just going to repeat that. I feel like a successful scientist because of my learning disabilities. I learned that it's okay to have like a lopsided balance, to work really, really hard. It's okay to think differently. It's okay to understand, or it showed me that that knowledge is precious. I learned that being goal-oriented is imperative for my mental health and the success as a scientist and someone with learning disabilities. Also, that self-advocacy is incredibly important. You always have to ask for help as a scientist, and I learned that early on in life. I had to learn that failure is something that is just that is rampant in science, because failures basically help you learn how to fine-tune your experiments, and then you get the results that you were expecting, or new results that are exciting to interpret. And also adjusting techniques and changing those gloves and learning how to talk to different people about yourself or about your research. And those are all things that I learned how to do as a scientist, or with my learning disabilities, that helped me become a better scientist. So I feel like I'm a scientist, and I love what I do, but I still feel conflicted that I'm stuck between two worlds, this intelligent world and this unintelligent world. I do have, I'm a scientist, I do the research that I need to do, and I have, those like an advanced degree, but I also have a hard time reading menus, and I have a hard time understanding certain things. And that can be difficult. And so I'm stuck between these two places. So what does this mean? Well, my learning disabilities, I feel, are good, but I still have a hard time writing scientific grants. I have a hard time reading scientific papers. Learning new techniques can be difficult, and learning from presentations can even be hard. In addition, learning some basic facts can be difficult as well. However, I think my learning disabilities made me a better scientist. I'm redefining my area of research, which is a small area, but it's because I've never taken knowledge for granted, and I've been able to actually like help get some papers out because of that, which is really exciting. I don't overlook unexpected things because of the way that I view knowledge. I'm able to obsess over my work, and my LDs helped me learn how to do that in a healthy way. And so I believe the pros outweigh the cons. And so if you asked me when I was in elementary school or middle school, do you like your learning, or do you like the way you learn? Do you like your brain? I would have said absolutely not. I have panic attacks. I worry about reading out loud in class. If you asked me when I was at Bradley, do you like the way you think? I would say, no, I don't. I'm spending 50, 60 hours studying for a quiz that most people are studying for a few hours for, so this isn't fair. If you asked me in grad school, do you like your brain or the way that you think? I would have said absolutely not. I failed my comprehensive exam. I am stupid, and I do not like the way that I think. But if you asked me when I was a postdoc in Cape Town, do you like the way that you think? Then everything started to click for me. And I would say, you want to know what? It's really hard. It's really hard feeling like I'm a step behind a lot of people in my like everyday life, just like understanding and processing information. But you want to know what? I can catch up. Sometimes I need things explained to me multiple times, but my learning disabilities helped me become a good scientist. And I think that it's really important, that it's critical for all of us to redefine the word intelligence. Let's not think that the old way of thinking that, oh, you have to be good at reading, you have to know a lot of facts about certain things. Let's think about intelligence in a more abstract way, where it's not just about these individual things, it's the things that we are good at. And so I feel like my learning disabilities have actually made me a good scientist, and that we can redefine intelligence. So I feel successful, but I still have my struggles. I still deal with imposter syndrome. I still need to talk to my jetpacks to help me overcome these barriers, and I still have to organize all of my goals, and that's really important to me. And so before I finish, I want to just give a few slides about the state affiliate that I started. And so the Learning Disability Association of Pennsylvania is what we started. And our goal essentially is to help the success of students and adults with learning disabilities or ADHD excel. And so essentially what we're doing is we have these multiple committees, and the first committee that we started doing some services in is we actually have in our STEM outreach committee, we are essentially taking, this is what you're looking at is a lab protocol. This is basically instructions in a science lab. And this is from a company called Evolving STEM. And they essentially use microbiology to teach evolution and how like bacteria changes so quickly that they design these wonderful experiments. But when you look at all the words here, sometimes like it can be difficult to actually read. So we essentially developed these videos here that actually help students actually see what they're doing. And we have an actor that actually reads all the words that in the protocol that you see to the left, that I have muted now just so I can talk over it. But then you have to the right in this video, we see the students or these scientists actually running the actual experiments. So this creates a multi-sensory environment for them. And so we're designing these different videos for a lot of different groups. And this is something that I think is really wonderful, that will help make science more accessible to different groups. In addition to that, we have science shows where we basically show that like science is for everyone. We want to increase neurodiversity in science. And this is just examples of some pictures from a recent show. We also have our Arts and Comedy Empowerment Committee. We essentially use improv as a way of teaching soft skills. And we actually had a show with neuro-diverse improvisers. And this is an ad that we used here. And it was basically showing all the audience and all these kids that, you know, it's okay to think differently. And we had games where we highlighted the way that we think, and we just made it like a lot of fun. In addition to this, we actually are starting an improv program at a school here in Pittsburgh, where we're going to do improv workshops to basically help teach these soft skills. And like the soft skills are like being comfortable with failure and learning how to like increase your confidence and stuff like that. So it's something real exciting that we're doing. And in addition, we started giving presentations about how to advocate in the workplace, and like it's okay to think differently. And so now we can go to we've gone to different companies, and we actually said, okay, so this is how you identify if someone is struggling. This is how you create a supportive environment. And so these are the things that you can do to help your employees self-advocate for themselves. And this is how you can present information in a way that is accessible for everyone. And so we have these different services that we're designing, and we're still very new. We got our 501c3 status in May of last year, but we're real excited about all the things that we're doing. So stay tuned with a lot of that stuff. I also like to reiterate that like I still constantly fail at things. And when I first started the state affiliate, like I didn't really know what I was doing. And I started filling out a lot of these forms. And one of the things that if you notice here, that it says Learning Disability Association of Pennsylvania, this is the first official document that I filed with the state. And then I was told by the national chapter, LDA America, they were like, you know that our name is Learning Disabilities Association of America. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't know that. And I've been working with them for more than a year. So I made that mistake and I was like, okay, I'll fix that error. And so then if you look down here, this is the official sheet that I submitted. And if you look at, I changed disability. So now it's Learning Disabilities Association of Pennsylvania. And I ended up misspelling association. And so that was the second mistake that I made in trying to fill out this bureaucratic paperwork. And so that was really frustrating. And so then I ended up talking to the state or like the national LDA America. And I was like, I need a lawyer to do this. I keep screwing this up. And because I learned to self-advocate for myself. And the national branch, they actually were able to give us a grant to actually fund us. So we actually have, we were able to hire a lawyer to actually do this. And so this is something that was really important to me, that like, it's okay to fail. Like you can actually overcome a lot of this, and I'm still failing at certain things. And what I learned in all of this is that I have a new mantra, is that I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm doing it well. As I'm running to these meetings with people that have been in the field for 2 or 3 decades, and I'm nervous about it. And I say, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm doing it well. And so what I like everyone to remember is that if you're a jetpack, learn or teach your students or kids how to self-advocate for themselves. They have to learn how to do some of this on their own, because you're not always going to be there for them physically. You're not going to be at their job. So they're going to have to learn how to do this. If you're an educator, don't lower the bar for those students. Have the bar at the same level, but give them the accommodations that they need. And also teach your students and your children how to advocate for themselves. This is incredibly important. So if you have learning disabilities, please try to find out what help you need. This can be difficult. You may need to ask a lot of different groups. Reach out to your local state affiliate or the national branch for help. They can do that. Find your jetpacks, find your people that are in your life that can help you. Learn how to self-advocate. People aren't always going to listen to you, but that's okay. You'll learn, someone will listen to you. And sometimes it's hard to find them, but learning how to self-advocate is important. Sometimes it's harder to just accept that it's going to take you longer to do an assignment or do a project at work or something. And that's okay. We need to know that, it may take a little longer. Let's not compare ourselves to the people around us. We need to learn to get comfortable with failure, start with small failures and say, you know what, it's okay. I failed. I didn't do this as well as I wanted, but you want to know what? It's okay. I learned something from it. And write down your goals. Writing down your goals is critical. We need people to write down their goals just to make them more tangible. And so you can look at them and say, you know what, this is the thing I want. 5 years from now, this is what I want. A year from now, this is what I want in this one class. And it's really important that people be themselves. Now, life is a series of walls along a path, but jetpacks are greater than walls. So find your jetpacks. So thank you all so much for sitting through this talk. I really appreciate it. If you're interested in learning more about what LDA of Pennsylvania is doing or what LDA of America is doing, please check out our websites. And one of the best ways that you can support us is by becoming a member of LDA of America. And you can find all of that information on how to do that on our websites as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Collin. I do have a few questions for you if you're able to stick around for a little bit.
Of course.
The first one that came through is, I would like to start encouraging and inviting students at the start of every year to openly talk to me or email me if they know or feel like they have a learning disability. I'm a 6th grade math teacher. Can you give me some feedback on this?
I think that's perfect. You are essentially asking the students to tell you what they need. You're providing an environment and a private way for them to communicate with you. So I think that's really, really wonderful. And that's basically that's the modern way of the teachers that asked me before a test, or when I was new to their class, where they would ask me privately, okay, so if you need help, what help do you need? And that taught me that it was okay to ask for help. So I think that's really important. So I think that's a great idea.
Okay, our next question is, I have a child who may have a learning disability. I read there are specific learning disabilities. Where can one go to get tested for all of them? Is there a list of tests?
So you'll need to find a professional that can link you to someone that can actually provide an evaluation. And so it'll usually be a psychologist or psychiatrist. Depending on where you live, it can be sometimes it can be difficult to find. But one of the places that you can go, like right now, if you go to psychologytoday.com. Psychology Today is a psychology magazine, but on their website they have a directory where you can find psychologists and psychiatrists and counselors that are in your area. And so you can actually put in your zip code and put in, like, you want an evaluation and an evaluation for a learning disability, and it should propagate different psychologists and psychiatrists in your area that are able to provide an evaluation. So that's one thing that you can do on your own. The other thing that you can do is you can email or contact some of these local state affiliates. And then they should be able to get back to you. Sometimes the state affiliates have only a few people or one person that are reviewing their emails. So sometimes you have to remind them to get back to you. And so if you're comfortable with that, then you can reach out to them, and they can provide that help as well. And in addition, if you think your child or someone has a specific disability, like if it's dyslexia or dysgraphia or auditory processing disorder, you should look up other if there's support groups in your area, and you can actually talk to different parents and different groups and different people directly about this. And it's the local parents in your area, they're the ones who are going to know who all the good who the good evaluators are, who the people are that you should avoid. And so there's a lot of different ways where you can go about this, but it requires some work and Googling and finding different groups that can provide that service.
Okay, next question is, which do you consider are the most difficult areas in the U.S. educational system, from school to professional schools, which are not helping or even might be hindering children with learning disabilities to reach their goals?
Wow, that's a really big question. But I like it. It's I think the hardest thing in the educational system is that we are teaching one way to everyone. And I think that's where the biggest issue is. And so certain students need specific help. And what all these schools need to do is they need to be better at identifying the students that have learning differences, and also providing the accommodations that they actually need. And so I'm not saying that a classroom of 20 is inherently bad, because there are limited funds, and in public education is incredibly important for our society. But what I think is really important is that schools need to they need to go out of their way to help. If they see a student, or if a teacher thinks a student has a learning disability, all the teachers should be trained in being able to identify if a student has a learning difference or is neurodiverse, and then should be able to provide testing for that individual student, and then be able to provide those accommodations. So I think that's one thing that we need to do. We need our teachers to be able to identify students. We need parents to learn how to identify if they think that their kids have a learning difference. And so then what this would allow us to do is allow us to provide the specific help to these individual students. There are various states now that are doing dyslexia testing early on in elementary school. It's like a basic test, and that's something that's really important, because if a student is identified early on that, okay, maybe they have a reading disorder, then further testing is implemented and they can get an evaluation. So I think that we need some legislation also that actually provides testing for this early on in elementary school. And then this would actually help identify students and make it more prevalent. And I think this would also help us reduce stigma as well.
Okay, and it isn't a question, but it is a statement. I am a pediatrician, and I think the teachers and all the pediatricians should have adequate training in order to make an early identification of children with learning disabilities. Unfortunately, the university's Department of Education, the pediatric training programs, and the pediatric associations aren't giving the appropriate training to those first-line professionals who could help children and adolescents to identify the origin cause of their learning problems and how to overcome them. I want to congratulate Dr. Diedrich for your motivation and persistency in reaching your goals, and your family for supporting you in every step.
Thank you so much. That's really nice. And I think you're totally right, because a lot of there are a lot of parents have access to pediatricians more so than a psychologist that can provide an evaluation. So you are absolutely correct. If you're still listening, whoever asked that question, if you want to send me an email, we can talk about this, because I'd love to pick your brain about what you're thinking about, how you could actually improve this. And that's something that I'm happy to work with you on.
Perfect. We have a thank you from the 6th grade teacher for answering her question. I'm assuming it's her, sorry, assumption. But I think that is the rest of our questions. So thank you, Collin, for joining us today on a Sunday. And the recording will be out within 24 to 48 hours.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.